They never built it on a map. That's the first rule of a place like this. Not because they feared discovery, but because they knew that if it ever was found, it would already be too late for anyone who stepped inside. I want you to picture this. You're walking through an overgrown stretch of woodland, the kind where every tree seems to lean just slightly toward you, as if it's been listening to your thoughts since the day you were born. The air is heavy, metallic, and there's an absence of sound so deep you can hear your own pulse in your ears. Then, between the trees, you see it, a shape in the mist, a building that shouldn't be there. No road leads to it. No path shows where it came from. Just a block of rotting brick and shattered windows standing in the middle of nowhere, like a tombstone for something you can't yet name. The records say it doesn't exist. The county clerk has never heard of it. The satellite maps show nothing but grass and shadows. But the locals know. They've always known, and they've learned not to speak of it, not even to each other, because here's the truth that was buried, literally, beneath its foundations. 108 bodies, not laid to rest in coffins, not marked with gravestones, stacked, layered, arranged with a precision that feels less like murder and more like ritual. You see, when you strip away the headlines, the rumors, the ghost stories, what you find isn't just death, it's design. And if you think this was an isolated horror, one forgotten hospital in some nameless corner of the country, you're already under the first layer of control. This wasn't random. It wasn't madness. It was part of a system older than the very idea of hospitals themselves. Most people think a hospital exists to preserve life. That's what they teach you. That's what the clean white walls are for. What the beeping monitors and sterilized hallways convince you to believe. But hospitals, real hospitals, are machines. Machines for gathering, categorizing, and harvesting human potential. And when one of those machines fails, when the facade cracks and the truth begins to leak through the floorboards, that's when they erase it from the map. The hospital you're about to hear about, the one that stood where no road should lead, was never shut down in the way you imagine. It wasn't closed because of budget cuts or a change in policy. It was sealed, buried in its own silence. And what lay beneath it, that was never meant to be found. But here's the thing about burying truth. You can only push it down so long before the earth itself begins to vomit it back up. The first body surfaced after a storm, a skeletal hand protruding from the roots of a half-fallen oak. A hiker stumbled on it, and for a brief moment, the official world took notice. But you and I both know the official world is just a mask. Behind that mask, other eyes were watching, eyes that had been waiting for this very moment, because once you understand the pattern, you see it everywhere. The institutions that protect you don't. The maps that guide you lie, and the history you think you know is written in ink that bleeds under the right light. Before we go further, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about 185 dead bodies. This isn't even about one hospital. It's about the function such places serve, the way they feed the machinery of power, and the cost extracted from the rest of us to keep that machine running. By the time we're done, you won't just know what happened beneath those walls. You'll know why it happened, and why it will happen again. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. Asterisk, they told you this hospital never existed. But tonight, I'll take you inside the walls where 185 bodies were found, and every single one was erased from the records. If you're ready for the truth they tried to bury, like this video and subscribe to Dark Footnotes, because what comes next They don't want you to hear, asterisk, the first thing you have to understand is this. Land remembers. Long before the hospital was there, before the first brick was laid, this place already had a purpose. Not the kind you see on a deed or in a county archive, the kind that gets whispered from one set of hands to another, the kind that survives in shadows while the daylight history passes right over it. The official story says the plot was purchased in 1859 by a private consortium of physicians from 3 different states. They called themselves the Benevolent Society for Public Health. Sounds harmless, sounds noble, but the signatures on the purchase agreement, they tell another story. 3 of them don't exist in any census records. One belonged to a man who had been declared legally dead 3 years earlier. And the last, the one scrawled in dark ink, curling like smoke across the page, matches exactly a signature found in a different archive on a property transaction in Salem, Massachusetts. Dated 1692, no one ever questioned it, because no one ever saw it. The deed was stored in a vault in the county courthouse that later burned to the ground in a faulty lamp accident. You see the pattern yet? It's not incompetence, it's insulation. The land was never meant to be public. It was an inheritance of a different sort, a place chosen because of what lay beneath it. And here's where we start pulling at the thread no one wants to touch. Every death beneath that hospital, every one of those 185 bodies, happened on ground that had already been fed for centuries. The soil itself had a history. Pre-Revolutionary War burial sites, disappearing settlements, a pattern of vanished surveyors whose journals were misplaced. After their widows reported visits from strangers offering gold for their silence. And yet, in the spring of 1860, work began, not with public fanfare, but in silence. The first wagons arrived under cover of night, carrying black stone blocks too heavy for ordinary teams to haul. Witnesses claimed the men unloading them never spoke to each other, only nodded, as if they were following a plan memorized long ago. No town meeting ever approved construction. No newspaper announced the project. And yet, month by month, it rose from the earth. The locals called it the box without windows. For the first year, there were no openings at all, just a black rectangle that seemed to drink the light around it. Then, almost overnight, the white facade appeared. Windows were cut, the sign went up, and suddenly it was a hospital. Patients were accepted, but never seen leaving. Families dropped loved ones at the front steps, and if they ever returned to ask questions, they were told the same thing. They passed in the night. No one saw the body. No one attended the burials. And here's the part that should chill you. When we cross-referenced the patient intake records, the few that survived, with cemetery logs from the surrounding counties, not a single name matched. Not one. Those people didn't just die. They disappeared now. Why would that happen? Why would a place devoted to saving lives consume them instead? Because the hospital was never built to heal. It was built to collect. And it didn't just collect bodies. It collected data about bloodlines, about certain unusual physical and psychological traits, about what happens when you remove a person entirely from the network of their life and feed them into a closed system where no law can reach. That's where the trail begins to cross into what you and I would recognize as modern institutional control. The techniques tested here, in this nowhere hospital, on this cursed ground, would go on to form the blueprint for psychiatric asylums, public health facilities, and even certain kinds of military black sites. This was the prototype. And they built it where no map could find it, because it wasn't for the public. it was for them. Her name appears only once in the surviving documents. Eliza Warren, age 14. Date of admission, October 3rd, 1861. Condition: persistent fainting spells and night terrors. That's what the intake log says. But if you read between the lines, and I mean really read, the truth leaks through like water from a cracked pipe. The nurse who wrote the entry was not a local. Her name was Margaret Hill, a woman who had been recruited from Boston just months before. Her journal, smuggled out decades later by a distant relative, describes Eliza's arrival in a way the official log does not. The girl was delivered to us after midnight, escorted by two men in dark coats who did not speak. She walked without assistance, eyes wide open, but her steps deliberate, like she was counting each one. The doctor spoke to her, but she gave no answer. Her lips moved, though, as if she were whispering to someone we could not see. Eliza had no visible injuries, no fever, no sign of malnutrition. She was healthy, which is why it's strange that she was admitted at all. The hospital's own intake policy, what little we know of it, reserved beds for those with critical or contagious illness. She stayed in room 11 on the second floor at the end of the east wing. That room no longer exists. The entire wing collapsed sometime in the early 1900s, long after the hospital was abandoned. But in 1861, it was newly built, whitewashed, with barred windows and a heavy iron door. Margaret's journal records something the official notes ignore entirely. Eliza never slept. For the first 3 nights, Margaret sat with her, trying to coax her into rest. But every time Eliza closed her eyes, within minutes she would open them again, wide, unblinking, staring into the corner of the room, not toward the door, not toward the window, toward a blank section of wall. On the 4th night, Margaret asked what she was looking at. Eliza's reply is the first direct quote recorded from her time in the hospital. "It's where they'll put me when I'm done." The nurse thought she meant the morgue, but the morgue was in the basement, not the second floor, and the space she stared at wasn't big enough to hide a body. 2 weeks later, Eliza was gone. No discharge papers, no death certificate, just gone. Margaret's final entry about her reads like something she wrote quickly. Under the pressure of someone approaching the room, her bed was empty at dawn. Sheets perfectly smooth. The corner she watched is open now. The wall has been removed. Inside, a cavity just large enough for her to fit, curled, empty, but warm to the touch. The following month, 3 more patients vanished the same way, always from the east wing, always at night, and always after staring into that same corner. You see, this is how it begins, not with mass graves or public horror, but with quiet removals. One at a time, under a layer of clinical language so bland you wouldn't look twice at it. But if you add them up, you get a truth that doesn't fit into the boundaries of medicine. You get a pattern, and patterns are dangerous to those who keep the maps. By the time the hospital closed its first year, 21 patients had disappeared from official records. Eliza Warren was the first, and she would not be the last. Asterisk, you've been in hospitals before, haven't you? Even the old ones have a certain smell, disinfectant, metal, the faint trace of something burned away. But beneath this hospital, the air was different, heavy, damp, sweet, officially. The building had 2 levels, the ground floor and a basement where supplies were stored. But if you knew where to look specifically, if you moved the shelving unit in the farthest corner of the basement, there was a door. Not a normal door. A hatch, iron riveted, with a recessed handle that left rust stains on your palms. That hatch didn't lead down with stairs. It led down with a ladder. 21 rungs. I counted them in the photographs taken by the survey team in 1972 before the files were sealed again. The last 6 rungs are damp in every picture, slick with something that isn't just water. At the bottom, you reach the sub-basement. It's not wide, maybe 15 feet across, but it stretches farther than the hospital's footprint above. The floor isn't concrete. It's stone, black, pitted, older than the foundation by decades, maybe centuries. Here's what's strange. The stone wasn't quarried locally. In fact, it matches no known geological formation in the entire region. Tests done in the 70s suggested it was volcanic in origin, shipped here from hundreds of miles away. But for what purpose? The walls are lined with alcoves, not shelves, not storage. Alcoves, just big enough to hold a human body in a curled position. No doors, no hinges, just indentations, like sockets, waiting for something to fill them. And they were filled. In the 1972 photos, you can see them, shapes inside the alcoves. Not all bone. Some still had traces of skin stretched paper-thin over the skull, as if whatever had been done down here had slowed decay to a crawl. The arrangement is too precise to be random. 20 alcoves on each side, one at the far end, directly facing the ladder. 41 in total. The number matters. I'll tell you why later, but for now understand, this wasn't a storage room. It was a configuration, and in the center of the floor, the part that stopped me cold, was a drain. Not like a hospital drain. Larger, wider, carved directly into the volcanic stone. Around it, etched so faintly you'd miss it without a flashlight, were markings. Not letters, not numbers. Spirals, intersecting lines, shapes that repeat in ancient petroglyphs, found thousands of miles from here. Margaret Hill's journal, the nurse who recorded Eliza Warren's disappearance, mentions this place exactly once. They took her down past the floor. I was told to bring water. When I returned, I heard nothing from below, only a humming in the stone. It made my teeth ache. When they came up, she wasn't with them. And here's what the survey team never explained. By the time they documented the sub-basement, all of the alcoves were empty. Every one. No remains, no evidence. Just smooth, black stone, cold to the touch. But the drain was warm, and the readings from their equipment, the ones taken in total silence after the last photo, registered a faint vibration under the floor. A vibration that stopped exactly 30 seconds after they closed the hatch. They sealed the hospital less than a week later. You need to remember this. They didn't seal it because it was dangerous to the public. They sealed it because it was useful to someone, and someone else wanted to keep it. Asterisk numbers have weight. In architecture, in ritual, in control, nothing is placed without reason. The untrained eye sees 20 alcoves on each side and one at the far end. But to the right kind of mind, that's not 41 spaces. That's a sequence. Here's the first connection. In 1837, an asylum in Massachusetts, officially called the Hollyford Sanatorium, was closed under mysterious circumstances. All records were destroyed in a document storage fire, but a few sketches by a young orderly survived in his family's attic. They show an underground chamber, narrow, black stone walls, 41 niches. 20 years later, a military field hospital in Louisiana, set up during the Civil War, reported unexplained losses among patients. Men who were recovering from wounds simply vanished from their cots. In a letter intercepted by the War Department, a nurse describes the lower ward as having 41 bays in which the bodies are set until taken, and in 1911, an unmarked facility outside Prague, one never listed in any official medical registry, was raided by local police after rumors of disappearances. No charges were filed, but the photographs taken in the basement before the cameras were confiscated show the same volcanic stone, the same layout, 40 alcoves in 2 rows, one at the far end, different centuries, different continents, same design, same number. That number 41 shows up in other places too. Buried in property records, it appears as the number of beds and facilities that were never public, as the count of transfers in ledgers with no destination listed, as the total number of specimens in correspondence between physicians whose names never appear in medical directories. You start to see the outline of something much larger. This hospital wasn't an anomaly. It was a franchise, a chapter in a book written long before America even existed. What connects them isn't medicine, it's collection. 41 isn't just a capacity, it's a cycle, a full turn of something, a harvest in one of the more heavily redacted files from the 1972 investigation. There's a line left untouched, maybe by mistake, once the 41 are gathered. The floor is closed, and the site rests until called upon again. Read that again. Until called upon again. That implies intent, continuity, purpose. These aren't accidents. These aren't tragedies. They're scheduled events. And if you're wondering how many times that schedule has been kept, the answer should make you pause before you sleep tonight. Every instance of the 41 pattern in recorded history is followed by a documented period of silence in the area. No sickness, outbreaks, no crime spikes, no unexplained deaths, as if something had been removed. This is why the forgotten hospital was never meant to be found. Because if you dig into it far enough, you don't just find 185 bodies. You find that they were only the latest harvest in a sequence older than the map. You think you live on, and here's the part that matters most. The count here, 185, is a multiple of 41. Exactly .185. Divided by 41 is 4.5, which means the last cycle wasn't completed. They left it unfinished, an unfinished work, calls to be finished. You've heard of ghosts in hallways. You've heard of screams in the night. But there is a silence, a kind of silence that does not rest in the air, but in the soil. When they reached the 6th sublevel of the ruin, the concrete gave way to dirt, not fresh dirt. Old, pressed earth, the kind that has been holding its breath for decades. The flashlight beams danced over the wall and caught the edge of something pale, almost white. It was bone, not a full skeleton, not yet. Just a curve of a skull where the soil had shifted away. But the men digging knew, in the way that men know before their brains accept it, that they had just opened a grave that was never meant to be found. It wasn't the first. It wouldn't be the last. You must understand something. Hospitals are not built to heal alone. They are built to contain, to conceal. The blueprints you see in public are not the ones approved in private, and the one you could never find on a map. That one was designed for the kind of medicine no government admits it funds. By the time they uncovered the first 20 bodies, the stench had already forced them to rotate in shifts. The air was thick, almost oily. One man described it as breathing in a secret, They wore masks, but it didn't matter. The smell wasn't in the air anymore. It was in their lungs, in their clothes, in their memory. The records, if they ever existed, were gone. But patterns don't need paper to leave proof. Every body was buried at the same depth. Every one faced upward. Every jaw was open, as if the dead had been gasping their last in unison. This is where you begin to see it. These weren't ordinary patients. No, they had been prepared, conditioned. It was in their teeth, filed down in ways that weren't medical. It was in the strange metallic residue embedded in the bones, the kind used in certain experiments during wars we were told ended long ago. Do you know what's worse than murder? Procedure. Murder is chaotic. Procedure is methodical. It means someone planned every step, recorded the results, and improved upon them, until death itself became an assembly line. When the tally reached 185, they stopped counting. Not because there were no more bodies, but because numbers are a comfort, and comfort was the last thing they could afford to feel. You're wondering who ordered it. You're wondering why. But you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, who still thinks it was worth it? Because here's the part they don't tell you. The hospital might be gone, the blueprints erased, the walls buried, but the work, that continues. Not in the same building, not even in the same country, but the procedure has not been retired. And if you've never heard of the place where the next 185 will be buried, that's the point asterisk. They thought the discovery would end something. That's the arrogance of the living. We believe that uncovering the dead will bury the past. But the past doesn't die. It waits. And when you disturb it, it doesn't thank you. It answers. The excavation stopped after the official report was sealed, a sinkhole beneath an abandoned property. That was the phrase they used. Sinkhole, a clean word, a word that erases the bones, the faces, the open mouths, a word that takes 185 lives and reduces them to soil. Displacement. The men who dug, they weren't the same afterward. Not because of what they saw, but because of what followed them home. One man, a father of 3, started finding surgical gauze folded neatly on his kitchen counter. Another woke up to the sound of metal trays clattering in his empty basement. One never spoke again, not a word, as if he'd been told something so final that language had no room left for him. I need you to understand, this wasn't haunting. This wasn't ghosts. This was protocol. Some things are buried not because they are shameful, but because they are active. They are experiments that never ended. And those bodies under the hospital, they weren't failures. They were proof of concept. What concept? That a human being can be broken in such a way that they no longer belong to themselves. That a soul, if such a thing exists, can be fractured, catalogued, and rearranged. That you can dissect a person without touching their skin. If you know where to press and how long to keep pressing. You think this is history. It isn't, it's inventory. Some of the names from that hospital reappeared decades later, on military rosters, on government grants, on classified medical papers. People who should have been dead in 1943 suddenly receiving paychecks in 1961. Photographs that show the same faces, unchanged, standing beside new machinery in new uniforms. That's why the building was never on any map. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was still in use, just not in a way anyone could visit. Maps are 4 places you can leave. This was a place you never left, even if they let you walk out the door. And here is the last thing you need to know. Somewhere, right now, there is another hospital without a map. Its walls are clean. Its halls are bright. Its doctors are smiling. And in the soil beneath it, the count has already begun. The next time you pass a building you've never seen before, one that seems too quiet, too calm, ask yourself, is it new, or is it remembering? Because if it's remembering, you've already been entered into its history, and history, as you've just learned, does not die. You could close your eyes now. Tell yourself the story is over. Convince yourself that what happened in that buried hospital is sealed forever beneath concrete and paperwork. But you'd be lying to yourself, because there are questions you haven't asked. Questions that won't let you sleep if you dare to answer them. Like who paid for a hospital to exist without ever appearing on a single government record? Who signed the supply orders? Who made sure that fuel deliveries never appeared on invoices, even though the generators ran day and night? And perhaps the question that will rot your peace the most, who was treated there, and then released into the world? Not every experiment ends in death. Some are meant to survive. Some are designed to walk among us, carrying the results inside them like a hidden fuse. Not to go off immediately, but to wait for the right pressure, the right trigger, the right century. There are birth records in nearby towns that don't line up with any living mothers. Children appearing in schools with blank medical histories, no vaccinations, no blood type on file. Adults with no fingerprints in any database, yet they rent apartments, get jobs, and even marry. Always calm, always watching, as if they're still following instructions. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The hospital wasn't an end point. It was a production line. And when you stand in a crowd, a subway platform, a stadium, a protest, you don't know how many around you started in that building. How many carry something that was never meant to be known, only to be used. The mistake the diggers made wasn't unearthing the bodies. The mistake was making it public enough for you to hear about it, because now you're in the chain. Now you're holding a piece of the pattern. And once you have it, you're tracked. So, I'll leave you with this. If you wake in the night to find your phone battery at 1%, even though you didn't touch it, even though it was charged when you slept, don't plug it in. Don't touch it at all. Because the ones who made that hospital vanish from maps. They have other ways to mark you. And power isn't the only thing they drain. Asterisk, there's one detail I didn't tell you. Not because I forgot, but because I wasn't sure you'd be ready for it. When they found the bodies beneath the hospital, the workers didn't stop digging. They had to make sure there was nothing else down there. No tunnels, no storage rooms, no living survivors. They found neither. But they did find one thing, a narrow stairwell leading down further than any building should go. Each step slick with condensation, the air so heavy that the flashlights began to dim. At the bottom, a single metal door. No hinges, no handle, just a slit wide enough for a tray to be pushed through, and when they pressed their ears against it, they heard breathing. Not frantic, not struggling, but slow, steady, like something was waiting, like it knew they were there. The breathing stopped the moment anyone spoke, and when they tried to drill through the wall beside it, the drill bits shattered, one after another. Steel shouldn't break like that, not unless it's cutting into something it shouldn't. Within 24 hours, the site was sealed. Every crew member was paid cash in thick envelopes and told they'd never been there. And the hospital, already invisible on paper, was once again invisible in the ground. You can tell yourself this was mercy. You can tell yourself they left it alone because they were afraid of what was on the other side. But I think you know better. If something is breathing in a room that was never meant to be opened, someone, somewhere, is waiting for the right day to open it. And when that day comes, you won't read about it in the news. You'll hear it in the walls, in the floor, behind the door you've always assumed led nowhere. Asterisk, you've been picturing the hospital in your mind, haven't you? The concrete, the stairwell, the door with no handle. But there's something you don't realize. This wasn't the only one. The files I've seen, the ones you can't pull from any archive, the ones without barcodes or catalog numbers, show 6 other sites. Different cities, different decades, same layout, same absence from the record. Every single one of them buried after discovery. Every single one of them sealed with that same door. And every single one still has something inside. They didn't build these hospitals to heal people. They built them to contain something. Something they couldn't destroy, or maybe didn't want to. You're probably thinking, why me? Why am I hearing this? Because once you hear it, you start noticing the empty building at the edge of town that was demolished without announcement. The fenced lot the locals won't talk about. The smell of antiseptic in a place that hasn't been open in decades. It's not paranoia if you can prove it. And the moment you can prove it, you'll wish you hadn't. Because they don't just erase buildings from the map. They erase the people who remember them. So if you've ever walked past a block that felt wrong, if you've ever had a sudden cold draft in the middle of summer, if you've ever heard breathing when you were alone, stop looking, stop asking, and for God's sake, stop listening. Because once they know you've heard it, you won't be able to tell the difference between the sound of someone following you and the sound of them breathing in your walls. They called it Quarantine Ward 9. That's what the few surviving floor plans say. Anyway, in faded red ink, as if the letters themselves were bleeding. But quarantine wasn't the right word. You quarantine sickness. You cage something else. The door had no handle because the locking mechanism wasn't meant to be opened from either side. Think about that. The man who showed me the photographs, an ex-surveyor who vanished 2 weeks later, said the first thing you noticed wasn't the temperature. It was the sound. Not screaming, not whispering. A sort of wet clicking dot, and the smell. Not rot, not exactly. More like the metallic temps of blood that's been left out for days, drying in waves. The 185 bodies they found weren't all in one piece. Some were missing organs, some were missing bones, some had pieces that didn't match. The coroner's report was burned, but not before one page was copied. On it, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words asterisk, every abandoned hospital has a paper trail. Deeds, ownership transfers, utility bills. There's always a record, except this one. The building where 185 bodies were found didn't officially exist. Not in county archives, not in state medical registries, not even in the military's property logs. That's not neglect. That's surgery, the deliberate cutting away of a place from history itself. I traced the coordinates from the surveyor's last report, and here's where it got worse. For other ghost hospitals sit in the same pattern, spread across the country like points on a star. Each is surrounded by a patch of land with oddly fertile soil. Each has a history of sudden population drops in the nearby towns, and each was abandoned without any official reason. When I overlaid the star pattern onto old railway maps from the 1900s, they lined up perfectly with a network of supply routes. And by supply, I don't mean medicine. You want the worst part. The 5th point on that star, the one that completes the shape, isn't abandoned. It's still listed as operational under a corporate health group you've never heard of. No reviews, no public phone number, no photographs that aren't stock images. And it's only 3 hours from here. You could drive there tonight. But if you do, understand this. The first thing you'll lose won't be your name. It'll be your shadow. Because whatever they're doing there, it doesn't just eat flesh, it eats existence. They're still moving. That's the moment you realize this wasn't a burial site. It was a pantry dot. And when the hospital was abandoned, when the walls were sealed and the land forgotten, they didn't clear it out. They just left it, fed it. The question isn't whether it's still there. The question is whether it's still hungry. Asterisk, I didn't break into the last hospital. I walked in, no guards, no receptionist. Just a sliding glass door that opened with a soft hiss, as if it had been expecting me. The air was too cold, not in the way a normal hospital chills the air, but in the way deep caves seem to pull heat out of you. Every footstep I took echoed down the corridor, yet the sound felt muffled, like the walls were swallowing it. The first thing I noticed were the lights. They didn't flicker, they didn't hum. They pulsed, almost imperceptibly, like the faint heartbeat of some unseen organism. The halls were pristine, yet there were no signs of life, no nurses, no patients, no sound of ventilation fans. Then I found the first door. It wasn't labeled, but the handle was warm to the touch. Inside rows of hospital beds, each occupied by a figure covered in a white sheet. No movement, no breathing. But they weren't dead. I could see the pulse monitors above each bed, a steady green line, no fluctuations, no beeping. They were frozen, not asleep, not comatose, suspended on the far wall. A single phrase was scrawled in something dark and almost dry. To heal the soul, you must first unmake it. That's when I heard it. The shuffle of footsteps from the hall I had just walked through. Slow, measured, one at a time, I turned, expecting to see a doctor, maybe security. It wasn't. It was a patient, or what was left of one. Pale skin, no hair, eyes black from edge to edge. And when it opened its mouth, no sound came out. But I could feel the words, vibrating inside my skull. It said my name, asterisk. I turned back toward the entrance. It wasn't there. The sliding glass doors that had welcomed me in were gone, replaced by a solid wall of pale green tiles, the kind that hospitals used decades ago. The seams were seamless, no break, no handle, just gone. The hall I'd come down no longer ran straight. It bent sharply to the left, a turn I knew had not been there minutes earlier. The fluorescent lights above me pulsed faster now, like they were reacting to my heartbeat. That thing, the patient with the black eyes, was still standing in the doorway behind me, still not moving, still not blinking. I took the other hall. It stretched farther than it should have, too far. The shadows at the end refused to resolve into walls or doors, just an endless grey blur. My shoes made no sound against the floor. I slowed, thinking maybe I'd catch the faint squeak of rubber or the echo of my own steps. But there was nothing. Every 40 feet or so, a door stood ajar. I looked inside the first one. A room with no beds, no medical equipment, just chairs. Dozens of chairs, each facing the same corner of the room, like children in a punishment circle. The second door, an operating theatre, but the table was made of black marble, and what lay on it was half human, half something else. The skin was stretched too thin over the frame. No eyes, mouth stitched shut, yet the chest moved, very slightly, as if resisting the urge to breathe. The third door was locked. From the inside, I kept walking, though the hall didn't seem to be bringing me anywhere closer to escape. My fingers brushed along the wall, but the tile under my skin changed. First cold ceramic, then warm plaster, then what felt disturbingly like skin. That's when the overhead lights went completely dark. In that void, I could hear them. Multiple sets of footsteps, coming from both ends of the hallway. Slow, deliberate. When the lights blinked back on, every single door along the corridor was open, and from each one, something was stepping out. Asterisk, they emerged slowly, one by one, from every open doorway. Not rushing, not attacking, just forming a wall of bodies on both sides of the hall, until I was standing in the center with no way forward and no way back. Their faces were wrong, not deformed, not monstrous wrong, too still, too symmetrical. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me, but none of them were alive. The irises didn't move. There was no flicker of thought, no trace of breath, and yet they all stood then, as if obeying a silent command. Their mouths opened at once. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was a single, low, resonant tone that felt like it was vibrating through the marrow in my bones. Not loud, but it made the walls tremble, the tiles in the ceiling hum, the fluorescent bulbs sway slightly in their fixtures. I realized with horror that the tone wasn't random. It had a rhythm, words buried inside the vibration. At first I couldn't make them out, but slowly the message took shape. We were here before the hospital. We will be here after you. You are not lost, you are kept. My vision blurred, but not from tears. My eyes refused to blink. My lungs stopped drawing in air on their own. The tone in the hall was breathing for me, pulling oxygen into my body against my will, keeping me upright when my knees wanted to collapse. The figures stepped closer. The line of bodies closed in, until I could see that every one of them had the same small, dark mark at the base of their necks. It looked like an old surgical scar, but deeper, like something had been put in. When the last gap closed, they spoke again. 185 before you. 185 beneath us. You are the first to stay awake. The lights above flickered. Once, twice, then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the black marble table I had seen earlier, and the patient with the black eyes was standing over me, holding something small, metallic, and humming that same impossible tone.